and the Rogers Firm, a proud member and sponsor of Wake Up.
Welcome to Cape Fear Valley's Making Rounds Live, broadcasting and streaming live from the WIDU Community Room.
The WIDU Radio Network, WAGR in Lumberton, WYDU in Red Springs, and WEWO in Laurinburg.
Making Rounds Live on 99.7 FM, 1600 AM.
We air every second and fourth Tuesday of the month.
Making Rounds Live.
The purpose of this show is to bring you information on health and wellness.
Here's the host of Making Rounds Live, Omega Jones.
Ladies and gentlemen, in case you don't know, that is the voice of the Fayetteville Woodpeckers, Mr. Ray Thomas. And Ray, thank you so much. As we welcome you to another edition of Making Rounds Live, I'm your host, Omega Jones. Now, here on Making Rounds Live, we connect you with the leaders, the experts, and the voices that are shaping healthcare in our community and in this region. Now, with what we're talking about today, I've got to put the disclaimer out there, folks. This broadcast is for informational purposes only. This is not a time for you to self-diagnose. Because of what we're talking about today, if you suffer from anything that we discuss today, what I want you to do is find yourself a healthcare professional. Now, ladies and gentlemen, as we prepare for the holidays, we're going to talk about the digestive system today. That's my Robeson County coming out. And backed by popular demand, we have Dr. George Agbakoba. I've been saying it right all morning, and of course, just before the broadcast, I butcher it. But anyway, he is internal medicine resident at Cape Fear Valley Health. And Dr. Agbakoba, thank you so much for taking time to come back and join us again today.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me back, and excited to get into some good conversation.
Oh, we're going to get into some good conversation today. Now, the last time you were here, we talked about gastrointestinal care, known as GI care, as well as colorectal screenings. Now, today, we're going to focus on some everyday digestive issues and this vagus nerve. Am I saying that right? That I've read about?
Vagus is correct, yeah.
And that's why I'm in radio, ladies and gentlemen. And that helps, basically sends messages from our stomach to our brain. And with what I read, it is really fascinating. Now, did you know, according to the National Institute of Diabetes and the Digestive and Kidney Disease, more than 60 to 70 million people in the United States are affected by digestive diseases every single year. And that's more than the population of California and Texas combined. Now, with the holidays upon us, today is a perfect day to talk about those eating habits, those digestive issues, and how it impacts our digestive health. Now, Dr. Agbakoba, first, what are some of the most common digestive problems that you see people face in this community?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think this is a huge topic, and I think it's good to start with a little bit of research, to talk about kind of broadly, or nationally, what really affects a lot of Americans on a day-to-day. There was a, good research study in, I think, 2018, and they looked at over 70,000 participants on an application called My GI Health. And My GI Health recruited over 71,000 participants and looked at all their symptoms, particularly in terms of GI symptoms. And what they found was like the 5 most common symptoms across the board were heartburn and reflux, abdominal pain, diarrhea, constipation. These are typically the most common symptoms that, I guess, if you were to extrapolate nationally, would kind of be a good representation of what a lot of Americans face day to day.
Okay, so you said a lot of Americans, not just a selected few. A lot of Americans face this.
Yeah.
Now, you did mention heartburn, and that is something that most of us have felt. I deal with it. Lindsay was talking about it just before the broadcast. And we really get it after these big holiday meals.
Yes.
Or let me rephrase that. I really get it after these big holiday meals. Now, when does heartburn become something that you should not ignore, and it's more than just little Tums or something like that?
Yeah, and I think this is a very important question because I think all of us have experienced heartburn to some degree. we eat a late night meal or a late night snack and we go straight to bed, and then we get that kind of acidic metallic taste that we get at the bottom of our throat, and so that's something that is very common. But it's also a good question to know, when is it an issue to actually like escalate the problem? When should I seek care? So usually what I would call like a red flag in terms of like how someone would present with reflux would be if you're having these persistent symptoms of like just not only reflux, because reflux encompasses just maybe one aspect, which is, sometimes a heartburn, but reflux can also encompass things like, bloating, and also abdominal pain and discomfort. And so there's a couple of symptoms that are associated with it. But if you're having persistent symptoms, let's say, for example, over twice a week for at least several weeks, and you've tried things like, changing your diet, cutting back on certain foods, which we'll talk about, in terms of food groups to watch out for, then that's when you should start thinking, let me see my physician, let me see my primary care doctor to just get a little bit more guidance on is there anything I'm missing in terms of cutting out parts of my diet, or do I need to trial maybe certain medications to actually help with the reflux?
Let's talk about the itis, Doc.
Sure.
Because we all get sleepy after those big Thanksgiving meals. And I read that is the vagus nerve.
Correct.
And I heard that it plays a role after those heavy meals.
Yeah.
You're going to have to explain this to
Sure.
me. Break this down.
Yeah, sure. So, the post-meal carb dump, I think we've all experienced it. I think the itis is probably the biggest problem in America, We've all experienced it probably almost every day of the week. So it's nothing that's abnormal. Normally after you eat, especially like a carbohydrate-rich meal, what I mean by carbs, your rices, your pastas, and so forth. Once you eat those types of meals, what ends up happening is, your body secretes something called insulin. And what I call insulin is it's like the key to a door. Insulin basically opens the doors to things like, for example, your muscles and certain organs, and basically allows sugar in the blood to get absorbed, right? And without insulin, you don't get that absorption of the sugar into these organs. So in a way, it's like insulin is like a key to a door, and the door itself is like your organs, your muscles, your fat that take in the sugar and store it. And without it, it doesn't get stored and it sits in your blood. So you usually will get this carb dump after where, the sugars get extracted from your blood and you start feeling that high, that sugar spike come down.
Ladies and gentlemen, we're talking GI care and colorectal screenings today on Making Rounds Live, and our guest is Dr. George Agbakoba. He is an internal medicine resident at Cape Fear Valley Health, and we're pleased to have him back on the broadcast today. Now, if you have any questions, you can give us a call at the WIDU studios. Telephone number 910-483-6111. Again, 910-483-6111. Or if you're watching us by way of the live stream on Cape Fear Valley's Facebook page or YouTube channel, if you're on the Facebook page, you can leave the question in the comment section, and we'll make sure we get those questions answered for you. Finally, I want you to share the broadcast. We're going to talk about a lot of interesting information today, much needed information today, and you do not want to be that middleman and try to relay the information. So share the broadcast so we can get this valuable information out to the masses. Our in-studio guest, in case you're just joining us, Dr. George Agbakoba, and he's our guest today on Cape Fear Valley Health's Making Rounds Live. Now, Dr. Agbakoba, let's talk about food safety.
Sure.
Buffets, potlucks, everybody's doing them during the holidays.
Yeah.
Food might sit out for hours. Risk of food poisoning. How long should we leave food out before it becomes risky or hazardous to eat?
Yeah, it's a good question, and I think it also depends on what you're making as well. Especially if you're, making, even cooked foods like rices, for example. I wouldn't leave those on the countertops if you've, boiled rice, for example, for over 24 hours, because what can happen is actually, interestingly, certain bacteria can grow. And we don't have to get into the specifics of the types of bacteria per se, but Certain bacteria can harbor in especially warm environments. So try to, especially for people who do like, cooking the day prior, ready to serve for the next day. Definitely be careful about leaving food out for over 24 hours, especially on like countertops or even on the kitchen stove. Do put them in the fridge. Do store them properly because they can be at risk of harboring bacteria. And of course, the same thing goes for any raw foods. Definitely avoid keeping them at room temperature. Keep them well stored. Keep them well packaged. And try to also prevent cross-contamination. That's also a big thing as well. When you're handling different foods during Thanksgiving, meats and so forth, fishes, be careful. Wash your hands between handling different foods. But the most important thing I can emphasize is store your food well. And if you're preparing, like a good person should do for Thanksgiving, make sure you store that properly.
All right. Dr. Agbakoba, what are some of the biggest mistakes that we make eating during the holidays? Is it overeating? Is it eating too fast? Are we mixing too many of those rich foods together that our guts are not used to?
Right.
Or is it a combination of all three?
I think just like you said, it's a combination of all three and the above. Yeah. So, I think when it comes to, approaching holiday season or any kind of big celebratory season, there's something called, I would call it a digestive survival guide that we can go through. We can go through a couple of examples of, just things to be aware of when you're eating, how to approach eating, because, sometimes it feels like a competition, when you're getting ready for a celebratory, lunch, dinner. It feels like a competition. I remember growing up and having, 3-4 plates, and having to get myself mentally prepared for it. So I'll talk to you guys about a few examples of things that you should consider. First thing is approaching overeating. Now, I don't blame anybody. I'll be the first person to have 3 plates during Thanksgiving. However, it can affect you. Absolutely. I know we just mentioned earlier in the show about, taking in, rich carbohydrate meals. Which there's plenty of, whether it might be mac and cheese, whether it might be rice dishes, whether it might be pasta dishes.
All of the above.
All of the above, everything. What can happen is, like I mentioned earlier, you get these sugar spikes and then you get this release of insulin. And the insulin is like the key to a cubby drawer where your body basically opens up itself, the organs and the muscles, the fats, and stores the sugar. So you get this sugar spike, the sugar high, and it comes down, and that's how you get this post-meal tiredness. So definitely, I would say, when it comes to, approaching multiple plates of food during the evening, have at least 20 to 30 minutes per plate. Put down your fork between meals, put down the hostilities, put the plate away, give time for your, stomach and your bowels to digest the food slowly. That'll be my first recommendation. And when it comes to rich carbohydrate foods, secondly, I would definitely say try to mix it with, like protein, protein-rich foods, whether it might be salads, nuts, any kind of grains between the large meals. That's helpful to help with digestion as well. The other thing I'll probably say third on the list comes to things like, any sugary foods, right? So your cakes, cookies, pies, right? Again, sugar spikes, sugar highs. Definitely try to, again, limit your intake with that because that's going to cause those sugar spikes and cause some post-meal tiredness. Same goes with alcohol. Alcohol, interestingly, can not only cause 2 things. 1, it can cause, has a lot of sugar. So again, you get the sugar spike. 2, it actually can relax something called your sphincter. So basically at the bottom of your throat, you have a sphincter. It's kind of like almost like a door, and that door prevents, things like acid coming back up into your throat. Alcohol can relax that and actually cause some reflux. And I would say thirdly, also with alcohol, it can actually cause you to pee a lot more. So you get dehydrated. So drink a lot of water, limit your alcohol intake where you can. These are also going to tire you out and kind of make you feel more sluggish. Let's see, if I had to give 1 or 2 more examples, I'd probably say, when it comes to the types of foods you eat, definitely, like I said, just eat smaller portions, eat more frequently throughout the evening. It's okay to overeat. Sometimes it's good. I follow an 80-20 rule. Eat well 80% of the time and not well 20% of the other time. So.
What about those well, I won't say, I used to do it, I don't do it now. Now I just taste as I cook.
Right.
But what about folks who decide they're not going to eat before the meal, so they will be able to eat during the meal?
Yeah, that's a good point as well. And actually, I thought of, maybe bring that up a little earlier. So when it comes to, how to approach eating a lot of food, especially at like a Thanksgiving meal, sometimes there's this myth of like, you know what, I should starve myself in the morning or in the lunchtime period and then go and eat. That'll create more space for my stomach, right? So just for reference, your stomach can hold about 1 to 1.5 liters, right? And once it starts stretching to capacity, what ends up happening is your stomach says, you know what, let's slow things down. Let's slow down the transit of food through the bowels. Let it sit in the stomach longer, so the acid and the enzymes that break down the food can work. So the problem with not eating in the morning and afternoon is you risk overeating. And again, in a similar kind of fashion, you eat a lot, you get a lot of sugar spikes, you get very tired, you become very sluggish because your body is trying to handle a lot of food that it can't process very quickly.
Ladies and gentlemen, our guest today on Making Rounds Live, Dr. George Agbakoba. He is an internal medicine resident at Cape Fear Valley Health, and we're talking GI issues, we're talking GI health, and we're talking colorectal screenings today. And we're doing this because the holidays are coming up, and I learned that there are some things that we do on a daily basis that actually affect our GI health that I want to make sure you know about today. Now, let's talk about bloating. A lot of people complain about this is the kind of, because I knew I was not going to be able to get through this without laughing.
All right.
A lot of people feel gassy
Yeah.
after eating. What causes that?
Yeah,
is there a way we can avoid it?
Yeah, it's a good point. I mean, gas is not necessarily problematic. I think even having gas is a good thing than a bad thing. When you don't have gas, that can be problematic, more so in cases where, you're not eating well, you get constipated a lot. Not having gas can be a bad thing. But I think having gas is also equally a good thing. Usually what ends up happening is you have these bacteria in your gut. So, think of your food, think of your, bowels as like, along the way you have different parts along the bowel that help break down the food, secrete stuff into the bowels, so that over time you get the food that you've chewed in your stomach, and as it processes down through your bowels, I know it may sound like your body is small, but actually you have very, very long loops of bowel. And through there you have food that gets absorbed, nutrients that get absorbed. And what helps break that down is a bacteria. And these bacteria can be like, gas-producing bacteria, in the sense that when they break down the food, they release things like methane gases, which is essentially what we release. So that's how it works.
You mentioned constipation and diarrhea earlier. Once again, no one wants to talk about these topics, but we all experience them. So when should someone see a doctor about these particular issues like constipation, diarrhea, bloating?
Yeah, and that's a good question. There's many different causes, and not all are related to, actual medical conditions. And when I say medical conditions, I mean more so serious medical conditions. I think definitely if you have tried things in terms of altering your diet, improving your water intake, cutting out carbohydrate-rich foods where you can, I think if that hasn't worked, definitely see your primary care doctor. They can give you advice. They can also refer you to a nutritionist as well. And they can give you some guidance on things that you can manage without medication. Now, like I said, these symptoms, they are not always all individual. They can occur as a group of symptoms. Things like bloating, reflux, some abdominal discomfort, they can be classed under the word dyspepsia. And dyspepsia is a word that we use, medically to describe these kind of groups or constellations of symptoms that we've talked about earlier in the show. And so it becomes a problem when you're having these persistent symptoms and you've tried things like, altering your diet. And we can also go on a little later about, maybe some medications that we normally prescribe in those cases.
Irritable bowel syndrome and inflammatory bowel disease. I honestly thought those two were the same.
Sure.
Because it sounded so similar, but I learned that they are different. So can you explain?
Yeah, sure, absolutely. And this is a good topic because, the shorthand form of these words share a lot of similarities, IB, and then there's the S and the D. And it's like, what's the difference, right? So IBS is actually a lot more common. IBS is also known as irritable bowel syndrome. And it literally means what it says. Your bowels are irritable, And so if you want to know specifically about how we classify in terms of the criteria of what, IBS gets diagnosed as, basically IBS is what we call a diagnosis of exclusion. And I know that sounds weird to say, but IBS is not something that is attached to something, when I say underlying going wrong, I mean, it's not necessarily that we can, for example, put a camera, down, your throat or through your back passage and have a look at your bowels and there's anything physically wrong with them. It's more so a functional problem where what we diagnose it as is, patients that have this like recurrent abdominal pain, usually at least, once a week for at least 3 months. And then it's usually associated with a few things. It's associated with pain when you pass stool. Sometimes there's improvement in pain when you pass stool. It can be associated with a change in the frequency of how you pass stool. And then also, lastly, the form of the stool, right? Is it more loose? Is it more hard? Those are usually the criteria that we go by. But we have to rule out all these other different causes of these symptoms before we get to IBS. And usually you need these symptoms to go on for 6 months. Now, let's move over to IBD. So instead of irritable bowel, IBD stands for inflammatory bowel syndrome, or inflammatory bowel disease, excuse me. And IBD is characterized by inflammation of your bowels. And there's 2 different types. We have IBD, and we have, as that broken down, we have Crohn's disease and we have ulcerative colitis. And Crohn's disease and ulcerative colitis affect different parts of the bowel, and they do so at different layers of the bowel. To keep it very simple, ulcerative colitis is something that is more common between both. It's a more common variant of IBD. And it typically affects your large bowel. So if you remember, you have your stomach, that drains out to your small bowel, and then your small bowel connects to your large bowel, and then your large bowel to your rectum. That's the course of our digestive system. And ulcerative colitis affects the large bowel. And it can affect anywhere along the large bowel, from your rectum all the way to the top of your large bowel. Now, Crohn's disease is different, and it's interesting because it can affect anywhere from the top of your throat all the way down to your rectum. Now, at any point, it can cause these like patchy spots of, inflammation. You can get ulcers, and it affects different layers, usually the deepest layers of the colon, whereas ulcerative colitis affects the inner layers of your colon. And it does so, ulcerative colitis, in a more continuous way, whereas Crohn's disease is more patchy. And so there's different risk factors, to keep it very simple. There's what we call an autoimmune component, where sometimes your body sends, immune cells that target its own tissues. There could be a family history of it. And then also sometimes it could just be, the makeup of your gut microbiome. And what I mean by that is everybody has, millions and millions, if not billions, of different microbes in their gut. And these help to digest food and also play a role in controlling inflammation as well.
Ladies and gentlemen, Dr. George Agbakopa, our guest today on Cape Fear Valley Health's Making Rounds Live. We are talking everything about gut health today. And when we return, we are going to talk to him about diverticulitis. The reason why is because I'm hearing a lot of people in this area, they come up to me and they say they have this. And we're going to talk to him about the warning signs and a lot more just in time for the holidays. Cape Fear Valley Health's Making Rounds Live. Make sure you stay close.
We'll be right back with more of Making Rounds Live.
Cape Fear Valley's Making Rounds Live.
Broadcasting and streaming live from the WIDU Community Room on 99.7 FM, 1600 AM.
The WIDU Radio Network.
I'm Lady Patricia Campbell, and you are listening to Wake Up. The Senate has voted to reopen the government and keep it funded through January. However, the House is out of session. Those members are now coming back to Washington to vote on the Senate measure. Meanwhile, today marks day 42 of the government shutdown. Congressman Don Davis of the 1st District of North Carolina says the impact is being felt across North Carolina, from farmers to military families to SNAP recipients. He says those who are on ACA or Obamacare rolls may find their health premiums hard to manage. Government shutdown continues to bring travel headaches. On Monday at Raleigh-Durham International Airport, there were 26 cancellations and 63 delays. Cold temperatures of the fall so far have arrived in North Carolina. Meanwhile, it's been snowing in the mountains. The U.S. honors its service members today. It's Veterans Day. Mike Rayleigh, NCN News.
I'm Jamie Monticelli, WIDU Radio News. Cumberland County business owners, mark your calendars. Join some of the tax administration staff on Thursday, November 13th, 2 until 4 p.m. in the auditorium of the Cumberland County Agriculture Center. That's at 301 East Mountain Drive in Fayetteville for a free session covering business personal property listings and gross receipts. City of Fayetteville government offices are closed today in observance of the Veterans Day holiday. Fast services operate on a regular schedule. Recreation centers will operate on the abbreviated schedule of 10 a.m. until 4 p.m. Today's household and yard waste will be collected tomorrow. Today's recycling will be collected as regularly scheduled. While city government offices will be closed, residents and visitors are encouraged to explore North Carolina Veterans Park, located in downtown Fayetteville. This is the first state park dedicated to North Carolina military veterans from all branches of the armed services. From WIDU Radio, I'm Jamie Monticelli.
This morning starting out with some bitter cold out there and temperatures below freezing early on our Veterans Day morning. Heading into the afternoon, one of the coldest Veterans Days in recent memory. High temperatures mid to upper 40s under a mainly sunny sky. Overnight temperatures about 30 to 35. Bundle up heading out the door Wednesday morning. But Wednesday afternoon, nice and warm. High temperatures in the low to mid 60s and mostly sunny. For the North Carolina News Network, I'm meteorologist Chris Michaels in the Weather Center.
Wake up, catch the vision, join the team. This is Pastor Reginald Johnston of My Father's House Christian Church right here in Fayetteville. We want you to wake up and join the team. Behold, how good and pleasant it is for brethren to dwell together in unity. It's good when we come together. We're one body, many parts. We desire that you wake up and join the team. It's good to be a part of Wake Up. Wake up, join the team. We will see you in Jesus' name. God bless you.
The North Carolina Healthcare Association invites you to listen to this month's podcast, Conversations on the State of Healthcare. This month, we dive into a project that's making big waves in Charlotte and beyond. It's called The Pearl, a bold reimagining of how healthcare, education, and innovation come together. My guest, Hillary Crittenden, leads operations for The Pearl and has played an important role in its growth and development.
The Pearl is an innovation district. We brought together medical education, cutting-edge research, and really big and small players in the healthcare space who are advancing science in a really interesting way, all together in one place.
You can learn more and join our latest Conversations on the State of Healthcare wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts. And find out more by visiting nchealthcare.org.
This is Pastor Wilbert Blandon Jr. of Antioch Bible Fellowship Ministries, and you're listening to Wake Up.
This is Pastor Neil of the New Covenant Christian Faith Church Ministries, 5427 Murkison Road, and I am proud to be a member of Wake Up.
We now return to Making Rounds Live.
Cape Fear Valley's Making Rounds Live.
Broadcasting and streaming live on the WIDU network, 99.7 FM, 1600 AM. Here's Omega Jones.
Welcome back to the second segment of Cape Fear Valley Health's Making Rounds Live. And since I forgot to do this during the first segment, happy Veterans Day. So now, and first of all, I just have to say it, I have relatives, brothers and sisters who serve in the military, and I'm very proud of them. And they're retired military, and they've done some things that I wouldn't have even thought about doing. So to all of you who wear a uniform, thank you so much for everything that you do. And also, since everyone wants to get healthy during the holiday season, let me go on and tell you about HealthPlex. HealthPlex has state-of-the-art machines. They have an indoor track, full-size basketball court, indoor pool, and tons of fitness activities. And did I mention that there's no contract? Now, what you can do is you can learn more at healthplexonline.com. That's healthplexonline.com. Now, ladies and gentlemen, our in-studio guest today on Cape Fear Valley Health's Making Rounds Live, Dr. George Agbakoba, and he is an internal medicine resident at Cape Fear Valley Health. And we are talking about GI issues. We're talking about GI health. We're talking about colorectal screenings. And before we went into the break, we were getting ready to talk about something, Dr. Agbakoba, that I hear a lot of people say that they have now, and it's diverticulitis and gallstones. Now, I haven't heard of gallstones in years, but diverticulitis I've heard of quite often. Can you tell us more about these conditions?
Yeah, sure, absolutely. Let's start with diverticulitis. So, kind of another interesting twist of words. You know, there's something also called diverticulosis. Osis-itis, right? Itis represents inflammation, right? And we'll talk about diverticulosis because when you understand that, you can understand what diverticulitis is, right? So let's take the inflammation out the picture and focus on diverticulosis. Diverticulosis basically refers to this small outpouching where you get these like small little pockets, you know, in your bowels, right? And these little pockets are hollow. And what can happen is, you know, because of the way food, you know, transits through your, you know, bowels, what you can happen is you have, you know, little bits of fecal matter that get into these pockets. And, you know, at times, you know, they don't cause any issues. But under the right circumstances, it can actually cause inflammation of these small outpouches in your bowel. Now, the question is, how do these happen? You know, can you stop them from happening? And the answer is not really. I mean, it kind of happens through a mix of the right mechanisms at the right time. There's no, you know, specific cause of, you know, these outpouches. But it's kind of been reported that, you know, one of the mechanisms that could happen is that, you know, maybe through straining, you know, when your stool is passing through your bowels, it can weaken the muscles of the wall. And, you know, just like any area that's a little bit weak, you know, things go to through the root of least resistance. And so what can happen is you can get these outpouches that form, almost like a hernia. Think of it almost like, rather than like a physical hernia that you get, you know, like an abdominal hernia, think of it as a hernia of your bowel, just, you know, small little pouches that happen. And so when you get the inflammation of them, what you can have happen is diverticulitis. Again, itis means inflammation. And this is less common, actually. So diverticulosis is more common. It happens probably, you know, prevalence-wise, you know, about 30% of people between the ages of 40 and 59 have diverticulosis. And it goes as high as 70% above the age of 70s to 80 plus. So it's very common, and, you know, it can be an incidental finding as well. Now, before we talk about itis, I'll just briefly mention that in most cases, diverticulosis is what we call asymptomatic. What I mean by that is people don't actually have any symptoms of diverticulosis. So you might have a colonoscopy and your doctor tells you you have it, but it may never cause you issues for the rest of your life. For some people, it can cause some issues though. One of the more common ones it can cause is what we call painless rectal bleeding. And what I mean by that is that you can get some bleeding from, you know, your rectum, right? You know, where you pass your stool, and it's painless usually. Now, let's transition to diverticulitis. So again, itis meaning inflammation of these outpouches. So if you get inflammation, what can happen is it can cause sometimes for some people severe abdominal pain. It can cause real significant discomfort in patients. It can cause them to throw fevers. And, it can also cause diarrhea as well. But, in terms of like bloody stool, that's not typically a common finding in diverticulitis. And usually in diverticulitis, usually your gut doctor will not, usually perform a colonoscopy because your bowels are inflamed and you don't want to put a camera there because what you can risk is your bowels, perforating and rupturing. So it's something that the episode kind of goes away, either on its own. Sometimes we use antibiotics if you're hospitalized. But a lot of it is managed supportively, with fluids and usually trying to stay away from certain triggers. Certain triggers like, high, carbohydrate, dense foods, fatty foods, dairy can trigger it, spicy foods can trigger it. So almost kind of similar to like IBS in a way, you still can get certain triggers with diverticulitis. And secondly, the thing we mentioned was also gallstones. Mm-hmm. So gallstones, we have this little sac, just right underneath our liver called the gallbladder. And so when you eat food, you have to think about food, again, like, it starts in the stomach and then it transits through the bowels. And at each point, there's going to be a secretion or breakdown of this food. And your body has different ways of helping itself to break down the food. It's not just that it goes through loops of bowel and ends up as stool. You got to break it down. You got to take in the nutrients and take in the water, and then you have solid stool. So the gallbladder secretes something called bile. You guys may have heard of what bile is. Mm-hmm. Bile is something that helps to what we call emulsify fats in the food we eat. So it basically helps to break down fats into smaller particles that are easily more digestible and absorbable. And so your gallbladder does a great job of doing that by releasing the bile through this network of tubes and into the bowel loops, and it breaks down food from there. In addition to other enzymes, which are these little particles that help break down food that are secreted also from things like the pancreas too. So they all do this teamwork and job together. Now, gallstones can happen when, just like with all these other conditions we're describing, you're eating a lot of processed food, a lot of fatty foods. You can get something called like cholesterol stones. There's different types of gallstones. You can get cholesterol stones. You can get bile stones, so it just depends on how certain particles concentrate with each other. If you're eating a lot of fatty foods, cholesterol is going to clump together and it can form gallstones. And they actually appear in different colors as well because of that. And so when you get gallstones, what can happen is you can actually get, pain for some people. Some people end up vomiting. Some people end up having abdominal pain. And for some people out there who've had gallstones, you may either have had a gallbladder removed at some point. It's not always an emergent procedure, but at some point you may get it removed as a recommendation. For other people, these gallstones can trickle through these tiny tubes and block other tubes that allow other stuff to be released. Like it can block tubes close to your pancreas, and you can get inflammation of your pancreas. And those who in the audience have had like pancreatitis know that's the worst pain you can experience. I mean, I've seen patients literally writhing in bed in pain, and all you can do is manage them with fluids and pain relief. So it's definitely something to be aware of. Keep a good eye on your diet, keep your fats low, and you reduce your risk of gallstones.
Dr. Agbakoba, what are some of the early warning signs that we know that something is wrong with our digestive system and we need to go see a doctor?
Yeah, absolutely. So for those who may have not heard earlier part in the conversation, there are some like red flag symptoms that we look at. Things like persistent bloating, abdominal pain, reflux that doesn't improve with, lifestyle modifications. What I mean by that is diet and exercise. We have to remember that we all have, it's a reciprocal responsibility. The doctors, we help, you, but we also encourage and champion our patients to help themselves first before we transition to medications. Now, some of the red flag symptoms that we look for example, if you have like I mentioned, persistent bloating, reflux, if you have weight loss that is unexplained, and again, a heavy emphasis on the unexplained, because if you have not been trying to lose weight and all of a sudden you start losing weight unexpectedly, that is definitely a red flag symptom. Okay. For some patients, if they find out that they've been anemic, sometimes patients end up more fatigued and tired. They go to their doctor and they find out that, they're having anemia. What I mean by anemia is your blood cell count is low. And what this relates to when it comes to like gut health is if you're having, some people have what are called microscopic bleeds. So you can have big bleeds where you can see the bleed, right? You cough up blood, you throw up blood, you have, bright red blood, maybe like hemorrhoids for those who've had that in the audience. Then you have what's called microscopic bleeds. These are more insidious. And what I mean by that is you can't really track it. You can't tell. You could pass stool and not even know. But your body is slowly releasing blood into the stool. And this could be a sign of, high risk conditions like colorectal cancer. Wow. So like if somebody who was elderly showed up to my clinic and they had unexpected weight loss, anemia, elderly, the first thing that I'm thinking is this needs to be a rectal cancer, colorectal cancer, until proven otherwise. Mm-hmm. So those would be my like high risk symptoms that I would watch out for generally.
Ladies and gentlemen, Dr. George Agbakoba, our guest today on Cape Fear Valley Health's Making Rounds Live. We're talking about gut health, GI care, colorectal screenings, and more on Making Rounds Live. Dr. Agbakoba, you mentioned this during the first segment, and for folks who may just be joining us,
right?
We mentioned that gut-brain connection. Mm-hmm. Can you explain what this, am I saying it right? Vagus nerve?
Yeah, vagus nerve.
Vagus nerve,
yeah.
Okay.
Potato.
Okay.
Yeah.
Vagus nerve, can you explain how it works, how it links to the digestive system, mm-hmm. and I read that it actually coincides with our emotions and stress level?
Yeah. So I mentioned something in the first kind of part of our GI health talk. So we have this vagus nerve, and one of the analogies I used was, to kind of put things into perspective. You have, billions of microbes, actually even trillions of like gut bacteria, right? You also have hundreds of millions of immune cells in your gut that help to control this relationship between having your body react to certain things and controlling how your body reacts to certain things in foods. And then, we're going from trillions to millions, and then we get down to just these vagus nerves, and there's a pair of them, 2 nerves. So you have this communication and this receiving of information from, millions and billions of cells and bacteria in your gut, and they all translate into this vagus nerve. So this vagus nerve, it's a pair of 2 nerves. You have a nerve that goes up to your brain, and you have a brain that goes from your brain down to your gut. And so what happens is about 80% of the communication and this interlink between your gut and your brain is actually to give information to your brain. The output is the last 20% where your brain processes all this information and it tells your gut, hey, I want you to secrete more acid. Hey, I want you to slow down, how quickly the food is going through your bowels, and many, many other things. So the relationship is very, very important. Now, it is interesting that the literature has shown that there is a correlation between, like this gut axis between your brain, the gut, mood, depression, inflammation, and it's actually true. We don't know of like the exact mechanisms per se, but some of the things that we've seen in terms of like what gets released by your body to control these things. So for example, when it comes to mood, you have something called serotonin, and serotonin is like your, mood hormone, right? And so what can happen is, the vagus nerve can actually stimulate the release of this, hormone called serotonin, and that plays a big role in mood regulation. It can also have a role in inflammation, right? States where your body is reacting to, certain insults to it, and it becomes inflamed. And what I mean by inflammation is sometimes like your immune cells get activated, your body responds to certain things that have affected it or it receives information from. And so, the vagus nerve also can, release hormones that regulate how your body responds to that. And if your vagus nerve doesn't respond appropriately, what can happen is you can get chronic inflammation. So we see inflammation, we've talked about mood, and then also in terms of controlling the transit of food, it can affect how well your body processes food as well.
Wow. We've talked about everything wrong. So let's talk about what's good for us.
Sure.
Can you give our listeners some advice about what's good for our gut?
Yeah, sure. So, this will depend on, many of different factors. What risk factors you have. Do you have any current clinical conditions that affect your diet? So it's not necessarily an all, encompassing, recommendation. It very much depends on what your conditions are. And if you have any gut disorders, definitely speak to your doctor or nutritionist. Or if you're a known diabetic, definitely also reach out to like a nutritionist or a diabetic nurse if you need any recommendations. But generally speaking, what tends to be bad for your gut is highly processed foods, fatty foods, fried foods, spicy foods. Those would be probably the top things. Alcohol. I would also say things that have low carb, or low density in fiber. Those are also poor for your gut. And for some people, dairy as well doesn't work well with their gut for many different reasons. But I would say probably those are probably a good example of stuff that I would probably be aware of.
Exercise and probiotics, do those really help balance the digestive system?
Yeah, I would say exercise, there's not necessarily a direct role in terms of like exercise will lead to X, Y, and Z, which will cure your symptoms of X, Y, and Z. Not necessarily. But where exercise works well is, exercise helps to, reduce stress, and in turn that can help reduce a chronic state of inflammation and stress that your body is under. And in an indirect way, that can play a good role in your bowel health.
Now, what about probiotics?
So probiotics are good, especially for people who, for different reasons. We have gut bacteria, and I know sometimes you think of bacteria as bad, but bacteria can be very good for you. And we have, like I said, trillions of bacteria that grow in our gut. It sounds scary, but they're doing a good job. That's what they're supposed to do. So probiotics can help to kind of replenish some of the bacteria in the gut that can help process the food better. Probiotics are being advertised very commonly now. And in some ways they're good, and in some ways, depending on how the probiotic is given, they're not always so good either. I think definitely, for those who have gut issues, try to stay away from even like carbonated probiotics. Carbonation as well is not necessarily great for your stomach and your gut. But you can take like probiotic pills. I think that's reasonable to say.
Okay. Ladies and gentlemen, our in-studio guest, Dr. George Agakoba. He's our guest today. He's an internal medicine resident at Cape Fear Valley Health. And we're talking about gut health today. And we're doing this because we're going into the holidays, and I learned that there are a lot of things that we do wrong on a daily basis. So that's the reason why he's in the studio with us today. Now, a lot of people don't want to hear this, but let's talk about gut-friendly foods that we can fix and prepare during Thanksgiving and the holidays. Are there any? Because everything you just mentioned is everything that's on my menu during the holidays.
Right. I will say everything is good in moderation. Now, I'm not here to be the Grinch, and I understand that we all have to eat what we want to eat. What I will generally say is, when it comes to foods, just to be aware of, like I mentioned earlier, for those who haven't been listening, one thing that we can do is just, monitor our carbohydrate intake, our alcohol intake, our sugar intake, especially with the foods that are prepared. One of the things to also consider when it comes to preparation of food is be careful of like prepackaged soups as well. Prepackaged, soups, creams, those can have quite a high salt intake. So definitely be aware of those. Those can definitely, for those who are, hypertensive, have high blood pressure, just be aware of those. But other than that, I would say, things are good in moderation. Slow down in terms of what you're eating. Take at least 20 minutes per meal. drink water in between and during. And then also give time for your bowels to actually work through and digest the food. You want to give, time for your food to transit through your body, and it reduces the chances of indigestion, reflux, and bloating as well.
You talked about water, hydration, and digestion. Never really thought about that.
Yeah.
Really and truly had not. So how much water should the average adult drink each day to keep things moving?
Keep things moving. Yeah, absolutely. I think definitely, try to aim for at least 2 liters of fluid, 1.5 to 2 liters of fluid. I think that's a comfortable, conservative recommendation. Those who have, those big jugs, I definitely recommend them, that have markers on them. That can give you kind of a goal to reach by the end of the day, because sometimes it's very easy for us to forget to drink water. So definitely have something that can, be used as like a stimulus or a trick.
Okay. And a couple of questions I want to get before we end the broadcast. We were talking about over-the-counter meds earlier in the broadcast,
Sure.
like antacids and acids. Can they cause problems if people use them too often?
Yeah, this is actually an interesting conversation that, is worth bringing up. I think antacids, and more specifically something called PPIs. Now, those in the audience who may have not heard of PPIs before, they're called proton pump inhibitors. You may have heard of them like omeprazole, for example. That's something that a lot of people are on, actually. A lot of people are on these, what we call PPIs. They're prescribed when people have like reflux, bloating, heartburn that hasn't really been resolved well with, just lifestyle modifications. So if you go to your doctor, what your doctor will tend to do is prescribe this medication. And we usually do it as a trial, right? Standard therapy is that you need to be on this medication for 8 weeks. And if after 8 weeks you improve, ideally, you should come off these medications. But what tends to happen is actually we're seeing a culture of, when I say overprescribing, patients are on these medications for very, very long periods of time when they don't necessarily need to. So I think it's just something I wanted to make aware because, PPIs, they do a good job. What they do, when I mean proton pump inhibitors, is in your stomach, it's very acidic. The pH is like less than 1. Very acidic place to be, but it's a good thing because it helps break down your food. Now, what these medications help do is basically help to reduce the amount of acid production. There's these pumps called proton pumps in your stomach. They reduce the acid, and in turn, that helps to reduce the amount of acid reflux. And what I mean by reflux is acid going back up into your throat. So what ends up happening is when you use these medications long term, and sometimes, you go to different providers and, medications are just continued for the sake of continuing. But really what should happen is you should be on these medications for no more than really 8 weeks, and then have it discontinued and try to work on your lifestyle modifications more. So the risks of being on them for a long time include things like it can increase your risk of fractures, bone fractures actually, because what ends up happening is, remember, it's an acidic environment, so it breaks down food. It helps to break down nutrients that are easily absorbed. But if there's not as much acid, certain nutrients like calcium don't get broken down well enough for you to absorb. So calcium is very integral and important into your bone health. So it can increase your risk of bone fractures. It can also increase your risk of absorption of other nutrients like magnesium as well. So those are like the 2 most common things. So I just kind of want to make people aware of that.
Now, those medications, the name that you were just using, the
omeprazole.
You're talking about like the Nexiums? And
yeah,
stuff?
the Nexium,
Okay.
absolutely. Yeah, those who don't, know it as a pharmaceutical drug name. Yeah, okay. Nexium.
All right. Well, before we close out today's broadcast, I had so many other questions. We're going to have to call you back on again.
No,
that's all there is to it. So before we close out today's broadcast, what are your top 3 tips for enjoying those big holiday meals without us paying for them later?
Absolutely. So Of course, you want to end these things in terms of what are the big takeaways, right? What are the small pearls and lessons that I can take away? So the first thing I would say, definitely, coming to, our talks about the types of foods, definitely, when it comes to going to, like, let's say a big meal or having big meals, especially in time for the holidays, as we've centered this conversation around, before you go and have a big, like, Thanksgiving meal, for example, try not to go on an empty stomach. I know, contrary to belief, try to have some like light foods, Greek yogurt, nuts, protein, salads, things that are light that help to improve like your feeling of fullness a little bit more, so that when you now go to have big meals, you don't end up overeating, and that makes you sluggish, and it makes you eat more quicker. Because, you just want to inhale the food, essentially. And that's also another thing. Air, you're taking in a lot of air when you eat. When you're taking a lot of air, that also actually, causes more gassiness. Mm-hmm. It can also affect your level of fullness as well. So that's something to be aware of. So that's one. Eat early and then don't overeat at Thanksgiving meal, though I don't blame you if you do. Secondly is definitely be careful of your alcohol intake. As well as your sugar intake as well, because these can also affect the acids that are secreted by the stomach, and in turn affect how well the food is digested. And then lastly, I would say, even after having a big Thanksgiving meal, it's not a problem. We all have had that issue every single year. After that, just make sure that, you take your time to increase your exercise a little bit. It doesn't have to be going to the gym, go on longer walks. Just spend a little bit more time to devote to getting back on track. So,
all right. Well, Dr. Agakoba, thank you so much for coming back, talking to us today. Thank you for taking time out of your busy schedule to be with us today. We greatly appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thank you, guys.
And ladies and gentlemen, once again, please join me in thanking him. We talked about our guts, keeping them healthy during the holidays and beyond, really. And if you missed any part of this conversation, don't worry about it. You can find the replay on Making Rounds Live YouTube channel, and you can also find it at CapeFearValley.com. Ladies and gentlemen, our next broadcast will be Tuesday, November 24th. So make sure you join us. We will continue our conversations about holidays and eating. So for our producers, Shaka Jordan, Ray Thomas, and Lindsey Graham, and the hardworking team behind the scenes, I'm Omega Jones, continuing the legacy of Darvin Jones. Thank you so much for listening and watching Cape Fear Valley Health's Making Rounds Live.
WIDU1600.com